Hello, my dear players, and today we'll be talking about the next set of gods in my pantheon, the gods of the Underworld. Now, there's only two to address. There's a bunch of Underworld beings and figures that fit into the mythology, but there's only two gods, literal gods. That is, Obitus, the judge and ruler of the dead, also referred to as the king of the end, and his wife, Dolor, the caretaker and keeper of the dead, also referred to as the queen of grief. These two are probably my favorite gods that I made, and the first ones that I made in this particular pantheon. So, I'll start by just describing Obitus. Obitus, as the king of the underworld, and the king of the concept of death and the dead. His job is very bureaucratic in nature. He has piles and piles and piles of never-ending books, of which he records the name and life of every single being that dies. No exception. Quite literally. Every single one. Every mortal, every animal, even otherworldly beings, should they sufficiently die, despite how much more difficult that is, they also have to come before Obitus, assuming they've not been, wiped from existence anyway. And Obitus, as this bureaucratic man, takes his job very, very seriously. He wants to make sure that every single being that comes through is remembered. Even if no one from the realm that they are from will ever remember who they are, Obitus will remember. And he will keep their story as a book, which he will, when he can, reread from time to time. This is what Obitus dedicates his existence to. And he takes it very seriously. But that mostly covers a fairly small part of his job, believe it or not. As ruler of the dead, he also keeps track of a lot of logistics and whatnot of running the underworld and making sure that it's maintained. And later on, after I describe Obitus and Dolor, I'll give a kind of a brief idea of what the underworld is like in this lore. The second, and the other thing, the more thing he's known for in the lore, is being a judge, as is in his title. What he does is that every being brought before him, he judges their entire previous existence. Everything they've ever done, how they were born, their childhood, their actions, everything. But he does so from a place of surprising compassion, despite how stern he seems as a person. And this comes from what he does for his job. He believes that to fairly judge a being, you have to truly understand where they came from. And as much as other gods may not want to admit, that can be very hard for a god to do, considering how different of an existence they hold. And so, Obitus, serious about his job, has thoroughly dedicated himself in being able to relive the lives of those who come before him for judgment. He does not judge them not just as this outsider who doesn't know them. he comes to know them as friend, family, as everything he can. He knows them as, through his power of godhood, is what he strives to do, is what he dedicates everything to do. So that when he assigns a person to have a place in the underworld, assign what their afterlife, what their next stage of existence will be like, it is perfect for them, that it is fair for them. And this has led to an interesting difference in how Obitus views himself versus how a lot of other gods do. And this applies to Delor as well. The thing about Obitus, not the thing about the other gods, is that due to dedicating himself so fervently to knowing the lives of mortals, well, knowing the lives of any being, but mortals is what comes through his doors the most, he has a certain appreciation and understanding of mortals that the other gods think they have, but don't. Obitus doesn't like that mortals suffer as much as they do. Obitus doesn't like how the other gods may use mortals as their playthings in their weird games. For Obitus, every mortal that dies, he feels their suffering, just as empathetic, truly, as another mortal can be. And this leads to Obitus referring to mortals in a very respectful manner when talking to other gods and when talking to mortals themselves, and will defend them, and when in conversation with the gods will fervently defend mortals from criticism, to the point where he's actually gotten into fights with the Allfather god Zoronanos. Zoronanos views humans, he views mortals as inherently inferior to gods, for obvious reasons. They're below them in a certain divine sense, so they have to be inferior in his eyes. But Obitus hates this idea. He believes that to say that is to completely undermine the complexities of their lives, for their lives embody concepts that a lot of gods will never understand. That Obitus himself, even as hard as he's tried, he only grasps a certain amount of it. He doesn't grasp it as fully as a mortal does. He simply understands enough to know that he should be as compassionate as he knows to be. And that's kind of the god that Obitus is. In a lot of ways, despite being the darkest being of the pantheon, he is, in a lot of ways, the warmest, despite how stern he is when you actually meet him. And a lot of depictions of him follow suit, where most other depictions of gods are very grandiose and almost royal and elegant. They kind of embody these trying to address them in larger-than-life ways. Obitus prefers to be depicted as just a man. In fact, he considers it a compliment to be seen as such. Not as a god, not as some deathly being of the dark, not as above anything, but as simply a man. And that is how he appears to people, usually. That he will appear as just a man in modest clothing, doing a job. And that's actually how he sees his work as well. While he views it as very important, one of the most important jobs there is, he still views it as a job. He doesn't think himself as any better than anything else because of the job he has. He just knows that it's the job that only he can do right, and thus he does it. It's, yeah. As you can, I don't know if you can tell from the way I talk about him, but Obitus is probably my favorite up there. But, carry on, there is also his wife, Delore. As a caretaker and keeper of the dead, her duties are less logistical and bureaucratic, and more, her day-to-day duties are more almost therapeutic in a certain sense. While Obitus has to, catalog and do all these logistics of the underworld and all this bureaucratic stuff, and then also that kind of bit of empathetic thinking where he has to judge someone in a proper manner. You could say it's kind of the reverse for Delore, where most of her job is the empathetic thinking and then just like a little bit of logistics, where she has to help actually direct a lot of the more direct things to happen for these people in their afterlives. She has to arrange for there to be the proper redemptions or punishments, though punishments are very rare, rehabilitation, what have you, whatever is required. In that sense, she figures out. So, and she also presents herself to all of the dead as just a warm soul, first and foremost, carrying a candle, directing all those who face Obitus' judgment to their proper place, giving them comfort along the way. And it's kind of hard for me to generalize her job. I don't know if you can tell from the way I'm kind of slipping words. It's very hard for me to generalize her job because it's very, very case by case. An example of this would be that if someone lived a life in which they were a criminal because they truly felt as if they didn't have other options, like a criminal was the only thing they thought that they could be, then what she would do for that person is, number one, kind of provide them a certain amount of forgiveness, almost, for being what they were in life, and help them move past any, misgivings they have about themselves for living that way. But also she would help them have a duty in the underworld, some type of job or position that would help reveal to them that maybe they did have a better option. Maybe they didn't, but maybe they did. And that this position would help show them that. And then after that, a lot of that would be about just exploring the new existence they'll have in the afterlife. And that's kind of a lot of what she does. Part of the reason she's called Queen of Grief is that she helps people come to terms with their lives and everything that they regretted and everything they didn't like and everything they wish they could have done. And then she helps them move forward into the afterlife with a new perspective where they are practically new people now, that they have hopefully moved past everything before. And that's kind of her job in a nutshell. It's difficult to make broad sweeping generalizations with how her job works. And there's also a lot of, not as much as her husband, but there's a lot of little logistical things here and there where she has to, make sure that a lot of the staff, the understaff, so to speak, are doing their job, making sure that they are treating the dead correctly and stuff like that. And then Something else about Dolor and Obitus is they both have kind of an interesting background as compared to the other gods in the pantheon. Obitus was once what we would call an ancient one, what I would call an ancient one. And the ancient ones in this lore might be another video or set of videos where they were kind of they were kind of like the Titans in Greek mythology, essentially. They get kind of that same position in mythology. There was a big war between the pantheon as we know and the ancient ones. The ancient ones lost, and Obitus was an ancient one that stood against his kin, and as such was allowed to be in the pantheon afterwards. And he is pretty fucking old. He is as the embodiment of death. Truly. He has been around really fucking long. I don't know if he's the oldest. I would actually have to do, it's something I haven't thought about explicitly. I'd have to, sit there and compare him to some of his other kin, because a lot of the ancient ones, almost by definition of their name, they embody really old concepts. I'd have to compare him to some of the other ancient ones that I have written up and see if he would have been around as long as them. But, yeah. He's old. That's the point. He's a very old concept. And Dolor is a little different in that her background is that she used to be a god of kindness and love. And she, in the pantheon, that's what her purpose was. And upon meeting Obitus and seeing how thoroughly dedicated he was to treating mortals in the way that he does, and being so kind to them, she gained a new perspective that perhaps the kindest type of god that a god could be would be a god of the dead, as opposed to a more literal god of kindness. That this is the place a god of kindness should really be. Not up in the clouds with all the others just staring down. They should instead be there taking care of those who have lived their lives and need new guidance in the afterlife. That would be the kindest thing that she could do. And it's actually due to this kind of recognition of the kindness in one another and how much they care about mortals that they bonded and got together. And it's genuinely a really wholesome, nice relationship where they play off of each other's strengths, help each other with their weaknesses, and really thoroughly dedicate themselves in this common goal of running the underworld in the best way that it can be run, in the kindest way it can be run. It's very wholesome. I don't know what it says. I don't know what it says about me that I went out of my way to make the gods of the underworld as wholesome as they are. But I did. So that's those two. And now I'll give kind of a brief overview of what the underworld is actually like, how these two end up running it. The underworld is essentially is a whole other realm that's kind of its own situation, its own plane of existence that has several layers to it, similar to the 9 hells, although it's not quite that bad. And the way it's run is very simply that different types of lives lived leads the dead to turn into something new. And depending on their journey of their afterlife depends on what layer of the underworld they are at. And yeah, that's a brief overview. There's a lot of details to go into it. There is a layer that is very much like what you would see that's very inspired by kind of some of these old Latin ideas of like Day of the Dead, what the realm of the dead would be like. Specifically, it's kind of that Disney-fied kind of idea with some changes to it. But there's one layer that's like that, like from Coco, or what's it called, The Book of Life. It's kind of kitty. Those are kind of kitty-fied versions, and take their own liberties, of course. But I've kind of both of those movies gave me a lot of inspiration of where to take one layer of the underworld. Another layer of the underworld, similar to that, is dedicated to people who are explicitly forgotten by those who are alive, where all they have in terms of anything is just here in the afterlife. They literally have nothing left for them in the old life to, and so the entire point of that layer is to help them get past that fact, essentially. And that's actually a good way to summarize how all the layers are. Each layer is designed in such a way that it is meant to help you get past your life in the best way. People who used to live as one way go to this layer for a while, so on and so forth. And there's a lot of bleeding through in layers. It's not like super strictly enforced. The only ones that are super strictly enforced are really specific layers for specific setups. For example, at the bottom layer, the most bottomest just is where, and that layer, that most bottomest of layers, is where they keep the ancient ones that they could not. It's where they keep what's left of the ancient ones. Because due to the concepts in which the ancient ones embody, they can't strictly be killed, really. Not really. You can render them unable to do anything. That is possible, and that's what they did. And they shoved them in that bottom layer. And to still... That might require its own video, but it's got a compliment. It's very much like a Tartar situation, but there's a certain shift in that due to how badly the Ancient Ones got screwed over in the war, even if they were to be freed, they wouldn't be the same things as when they were defeated. They are fundamentally different things now, due to just having lost in the way that they did and been in this layer for so long. They would just, and due to the fact that there's now new gods that are kind of operating the domains that they used to operate, it would cause them to change. And that I think about it, it would be a very interesting plot line, and a pretty obvious one to have one get out and what it would look like now. It wouldn't be good. It wouldn't be good for anyone if one got out. Well, could an ancient one be rehabilitated, like another killed one, like a more? That's a good question. I actually ended on that note. Maybe you guys can give me some ideas on what it would look like to rehabilitate a Titan equivalent, an ancient one. And so yeah, those are the gods of death and the underworld. So if you guys have any fun takes or ideas to talk about with underworlds and mythologies, please leave a comment about it. And yeah, it's been fun, and talk to y'all next time.